Hi everyone, welcome back to episode 8 of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Today's interview is with Kris Jagasia. Kris talks about building a thriving ESL software company, Off2Class.com. Kris discusses how he got started in entrepreneurship, how, along with his partners, he bootstrapped his enterprise and gained profitability. Kris gives some valuable insights about management, entrepreneurship, pivoting, and what's coming down the line in the ESL world. Kris is the co-founder of Off2Class.com. The platform is used by thousands of teachers in over 120 countries around the world. I had a great time talking to Kris. Some great info there for entrepreneurs, and I hope you enjoy it too.
Hey everyone, buckle up for a new episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, the one and only podcast made to help you launch your business or take your existing business to a level of success you could never have imagined. Whether you're a school owner, freelancer, publisher, or other entrepreneur, you're sure to pick up lots of actionable advice when you listen to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Remember to visit eflmagazine.com for great articles and features. Without further ado, here's your host, the founder of EFL Magazine, Philip Pound.
It's my great pleasure today to introduce Kris Jagasia to you. Kris is based in Canada. Kris, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Philip. It's great to be here. Yeah, we've definitely connected a couple times over the years. So great to be here in your new series, kind of focusing more on the business side of the ESL industry, EFL industry.
Yeah, thanks, Kris. It's been 5 years now. I mean, things go so quickly, don't they? And I think I did a conference, an online conference about 5 years ago, and I posted it on social media recently, and people were like, "Wow, that's 5 years ago already." So,
yeah,
that's
the time flies. It's been. Someone asked me when did we start Off2Class, and I had to check, and apparently it was 2013, and apparently it's 2021 now. So
yeah, it's one of those things. In one way, it's like a lifetime, and then it's like a blink of an eye, isn't it? Really, in
it is
way.
the longest job I've ever had, by far. Which I find really fascinating. Yeah.
And would you consider it a job? Because a lot of people, when they're entrepreneurs, and I think, what was it, Aristotle first said it, and I think it's been copied and misattributed down the years. If you do something you love, you won't work a day in your life. I mean, do you consider it a job, a vocation, or
it's definitely a source. It's a living. I would say it's a living, because everybody needs to survive. But I would probably define Off2Class as a journey, as a way of life. It's all encompassing in that sense. And I'll use the word journey mostly because I think with a lot of kind of software and technology startups that go on and grow and are achieve some form of success, it's a constant reevaluation of what you're doing, of product market fit, of fixing things, making things better. So yeah, I would really say that Off2Class has been mostly a journey. At the start, we were really just kind of a SaaS tool for independent ESL teachers that were teaching online. We had no kind of aspirations of selling the software into large institutions, into school districts, into private schools, all sorts of stuff like that. We really just wanted to make a great tool for ESL teachers that were teaching online, which is actually what we were doing at the time, in myself and my co-founders. So yeah, we just wanted to make an awesome tool. We were teaching online. There wasn't a lot of good content for a video conference classroom, so we wanted to kind of bring a lot of the content we were making into an easy software tool. And then from there, we were always kind of landing clients that were a little bit bigger than we could really service. So folks like the guys at Fluent B that were, building a big online ESL school, private schools here in Canada that had international students. So it was really like layering on that B2B side that taught us what it's like to provide a service for schools. But throughout the journey, we've never stopped serving those kind of independent ESL teachers that are working online. That's kind of stayed a theme throughout everything. And I'd have to say they've taught us a lot. They can be a tough crowd sometimes, so they teach you a lot.
And tell me a little bit about your own background and why ESL. Was this an area you were particularly interested in, or was it more software background? How did it all begin?
That's a great question. No, I actually used to work in finance and in the technology space. And then I was in a career break, and I was in Istanbul during that career break with my co-founder, James Haywood, who is a linguist, lifelong ESL teacher. And at the time, he was teaching at a private school, a private international school in Istanbul, and as an English teacher, as an ESL teacher. And he was teaching a lot of his students from his day job as private students on the weekend. And I was kind of fascinated about this. One of his pain points was that Istanbul is a giant city. So this is way back in 2012. And so even though he was based in Turkey, he started teaching his students online. Skype was the video conference system back then. This is pre-Zoom days. And when he was kind of teaching online, his caseload got too big, and we actually started an online school that was designed really for the Turkish learner market. And we ran that business for a little while, about a year, and we kind of decided that running an online ESL school wasn't really where our hearts were at. It was very similar to running a physical school in that, teachers don't show up for work sometimes, students don't show up for class sometimes. So there was a lot of kind of scheduling and kind of friction points there. But what we did realize was the content that we had built for the lessons, and this was just basically in PowerPoint, that the content we'd actually built for the lessons for these video conference classrooms was unique. There was nothing else that we could really find. And it was really that kind of experience with Turks Learn English that gave the idea for Off2Class, for taking the content we'd built for that business and putting it into a tool that we could then release to ESL teachers. So that was basically the genesis of Off2Class.
Okay, and tell me a little bit about the Turkish market. What if one of our listeners does business in Turkey or is intending to? Do you have any words of advice?
That's a great question. Well, learning English in Turkey, for any Turkish listeners here, they would know is almost like a national pastime. So I know that you're based in Japan. So I understand, similarly to Japan, that people are constantly learning English, enrolled in institutions, private tutors, the whole thing. But progression is sometimes lacking a little bit. So that's one thing. It's a huge market because there's, obviously it's a growing kind of growth GDP market, a lot of people under the age of 20, young demographic there, a lot of foreign presence, European companies with manufacturing facilities and production facilities in the country. So there's a huge demand for English in Turkey. but sometimes from an institutional perspective, it can lack a little bit, the quality of instruction, just because it's so diversified. So no, I think Turkey's a fantastic market to explore. Off2Class, we've long worked with, private ESL tutors working in Turkey. We have a couple institutional clients. The Middle East Technical University uses Off2Class for their entire English program, English as a second language program. But I do not have a huge amount of experience in Turkey from an institutional perspective. I wouldn't be the person to ask about, kind of selling B2B within the English language industry in Turkey. Most of our my B2B experience journey with Off2Class has been centered around the United States and Mexico, of all places. Yeah.
Okay. So that's your main market at the moment. So tell me a little bit. As you came from a finance background, what foundation did that give you for?
You'd be surprised when you're kind of bootstrapping a technology company at the start, how little it's about numbers, how little, of finance or accounting kind of acumen comes into play. It's really about, like, kind of initially, it's all about product market fit. Can you build a product that people love? That is what's going to determine your success. All the other stuff, also, can you build a product that people will pay for? All the other stuff, like, I don't know, your accounting and reporting and HR, and can you get salespeople and marketing and hiring, like, all of those other little kind of micro problems will generally fix themselves if you can have a product that people love. So at the start, I didn't know anything. I was just, myself and my co-founders were just learning as we went. Definitely from a finance perspective, what's helpful for an entrepreneur is just being able to deliver kind of output, or basically being able to get a lot of work done in a very short period of time. Like, really trying to, like, having those skills to just crunch stuff out. That of course can be cultivated in other domains, like, it can be developed in other places. But I think for me, finance, taught me how to do a ton of work in a short period of time. So that's definitely helpful from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Okay, excellent. And tell me the magic formula then. How do you make somebody love your product, love your service?
Well, you got to listen to them at the start, and be open to the feedback. And, in the EFL world, that can be a bit tough, because teachers have a lot of feedback. So you need some thick skin. But yeah, most importantly, you need to listen to the people that are getting exposed to your product. Off2Class was in a beta mode for about a year before we launched as a paid service. While we were building up the content base, we were inviting teachers to access it for free. And it was probably a core group of about 300-400 teachers at the most. And they were, constantly giving us feedback, constantly letting us know what they liked, what they didn't like. And then that's still very much how things work today. Our product roadmap is basically driven by the team getting access to people's feedback, and what's in demand. That's what we focus on.
And tell me a little bit, what stands out? What did people really not like? What did they really like?
You know what? At the start, what people didn't like was that you couldn't print the content. That was a huge deal, back in 2013, 14. You're telling me I can't print this? Like, what are you? But and you know, we'd have to push back and be like, but you're teaching online. Why do you want to print it? They're like, oh, but I don't care. I still need a physical copy while I'm working with the students. Obviously, that, you know, having been in this for so long, that is not an issue in 2021.
Yeah.
But being able to print was a huge deal back then. You know what the other big one was?
Mm-hmm.
American versus British English.
Oh,
And
really?
Americans thought it was too British, but
Ah.
Brits thought it was too American. So that's gone away now.
Oh.
No, yeah, I did. No one seems too fussed about that distinction these days. So yeah, those are two kind of issues that used to come up. What they loved about it was it was always the content that they fell in love with. It was this, you know, content that's been designed for screen-based environments, you know, truly teacher-led, kind of not just a course book that's been kind of a PDF or something like that, you know, content that you can adapt in real time for a live conversation class. That was always what people were really, really into. So, you know, that's what kind of pushed us to really invest in the content over the years.
And tell me a little bit about starting the company and funding. How did you organize that? How did you get that in place? You mentioned it was kind of bootstrapped.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it was the founders, their savings funded the development at the start. Most of the cost being, you know, your living expenses while you're building it. And then it was very important for us to monetize quickly because we didn't know. We wanted to understand whether this was a product people would pay for. So we had to monetize. You know, Off2Class was a purchasable product about a year after starting on it. So that was relatively quick, obviously compared to a lot of other you know, software. And then we funded almost entirely off revenue, and we raised a small amount of money off our friends and family. So I use the term bootstrapped. Technically, we're not 100% bootstrapped because we did raise a bit of money off our friends and family, but we're almost 100% bootstrapped.
And tell me a little bit about risk. So when you started out, what you presumably worked for, what was a bank or some financial institution?
It was
That right?
yeah, it was actually Deloitte and Touche corporate
Oh,
finance, so
okay.
kind of finance type stuff, and then a sovereign wealth fund in Abu Dhabi. So yeah, there was a significant drop in pay.
I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, and the funny thing is now, after being there was a point, like let's call it like 4 or 5 years into Off2Class, or maybe 3 years into Off2Class, and I was talking to my co-founder James, and I said, I don't even know what job I'd be able to go back to. Like there is a point of no return, right? Where you're kind of stuck. Like this is it, right? Because if I was to go back, maybe now I could get a job at some other software company or something and run their sales team. I don't even know. But if I was to go back into the finance world, go back to Deloitte corporate finance, they'd pretty much offer me the title of when I left. They wouldn't, you know, the finance industry or any traditional industry, they don't really value the experience you're building in the entrepreneurial space. So there is a point of no return where you're just kind of, you're all in, to borrow some kind of poker terminology.
Yeah, yeah. And working for Deloitte, did you work with a lot of risk takers? I wouldn't think so.
No, absolutely not. Most of the people were just really comfortable with, you know, working very hard to earn decent money at a relatively low level of risk.
Mm. But that wasn't for you.
No,
Mm.
that was the spawning of the career break that ended up in Istanbul. I think I turned around one day and I said, this can't be it.
Mm. And tell me a little bit, what motivates you then?
I really like kind of hard problems and challenges, and I'm really, off to class still definitely challenges me on a daily basis. As we take on bigger clients, yeah, a constant product market fit reevaluation. Obviously, COVID has been, a massive kind of era of digital transformation that has increased, the demand across the board for off to classes services. But, there's been a lot of pivoting or micro pivoting throughout, if I think back to March of last year, we've had to adjust things as we've gone along. It hasn't just been an immediate, boring some baseball terminology home run. Um, we had to we had to kind of, roll with the punches a little bit. So, you know, daily challenges, daily kind of excitement. Still what I like, still what I enjoyed off to class.
And tell me about COVID. Obviously, it has been good for your business. If COVID is good for anything, it's ill wind. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, how has your business?
So it's interesting. At the start, um, we did work with a number of, traditional private language institutes in English speaking countries. So really that kind of travel English segment. And at the start of the pandemic, there was a couple big conversations that had been going on for many months with several private language institutes. For example, the New College Group in the UK, NCG, people like OHLA in the US, where we were already in relatively advanced stages of talking about, utilizing off to class for online lessons at those private language institutes. And so those conversations accelerated extremely quickly. Uh, but then for everybody else that we weren't able to kind of move with quickly last March, everything kind of died in that segment. So there was a refocusing effort by us to repivot to, okay, so it's not private language institutes obviously right now that we're going to focus on. And so we started really focusing on our B2C segment again, which obviously was doing very well, independent online teachers, as well as US public school districts, very much needed an off to class like solution for their kind of, they call them ELL population. And then private K-12, as well as institutions we work with in Mexico. So yeah, it's just been a matter of still being nimble enough to kind of to adjust.
And tell me about the percentage of your users. You say B2C, B2B, let's say individuals and companies or school districts.
Yeah,
What's kind of breakdown there?
it's almost 50-50.
Oh, oh, okay.
Yeah, it continues to be almost 50-50.
And what's the particular challenges of dealing with B2C versus B2B and vice versa?
Well, B2C, they make relatively quick purchasing decisions, so that's great. Um, but they are obviously smaller tickets with almost the same proportion of support requirements as a larger B2B institution. So being able to serve or service, such a large volume of customers is challenging at times. But we use a lot of kind of community-led initiatives. The off to class kind of community is great. We've got a Facebook group, and our biggest fans tend to answer a lot of support and type questions for us, which is great. over the last summer, we launched a free account. So that really increased, a lot more folks were coming to Off2Class to use it for free. And that obviously increased the amount of kind of customer support. So then we had to kind of make another one of those micro pivots where, we're really amping up our Facebook community to kind of help us out on stuff like that. And then on the B2B side, it's obviously much longer purchasing decisions that you have to kind of just accept, and then you get a lot more institutional stuff where it's all about how do I roster 1,000 students or something, or how do I set up all these classes, and what's the scope and sequence of this group versus that group, and how do I measure progress, and how do I a lot of those things that if you would have asked me in 2013, we had no idea about any of that.
So that's encouraging for listeners, for entrepreneurs. And you talked about difficulty and the joy of, finding things out, the joy of learning new things. Tell me a little bit about that journey, about building your skill set, and, come from a finance background. Now you have to deal with IT, customer service, sales.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I would kind of say that it's only in moments like these when you kind of look back a little bit and you reflect that you really tabulate all of that. Most of the learning is just almost on an everyday basis. You're just figuring stuff out. Like if you're the type of person that watches, needs to complete a task, and then just watches a YouTube video and then figures it out. That's I think like one of the best possible skill sets for a technology entrepreneur. If you're just that person who figures it out, because that's what you need to do. Like at the start, like now, if you've got a bit of cash flow coming in, you can like hire people that are smarter than you to figure it out. But at the start, man, it's like you have to figure this all out. So get those Googling skills up, and yeah.
And that's not something you would learn in a cubicle, is it?
You know what? Actually, in fairness to my
that's
cubicle,
I generalize there, but yeah.
Yeah, no, in fairness to my cubicle days, that there was a lot of a partner would come in and say, all right, we're pitching to someone in the forestry industry or something, build me a presentation that makes us look smart about forestry, and you go and see what you can find on the shared drive, and then you kind of just like hack it together. And by the way, I need it by tomorrow morning. So that is a good kind of breeding ground for developing some of those skills.
And tell me a little bit about when you're not working, your hobbies, what you like to do, and how does that
outdoors? I think for a lot of people that are working from home, as everybody is now, and constantly on screens, constantly on the internet, I think remembering that there is a natural world out there, and particularly for during this pandemic, it's been in Toronto. I live across the street from a giant park, so running, biking, skiing when I can make it out west, all sorts of outdoor activities, and just remembering that there's an amazing natural world out there, and life is not on the internet, even though work is.
Yeah, for some, yeah, and let's hope things can turn around a little bit. I know in some countries,
Absolutely.
We've got limited. Back home in Ireland, it's a 5K limit to moving outside your home. The next thing I wanted to talk about was a little bit about, do you think there's a pattern or formula, or there's many ways to success?
I think there's so many ways to success. If you look in kind of the tech world, the traditional idea is like, oh, like it's all about, raising money, almost as if that is somehow an accomplishment or a means to an end. So, if you're a bootstrap company that hasn't raised any kind of VC cash, there's a whole segment out there that thinks that you're not a serious company. Um, Whereas, there's so many different ways to kind of achieve things. And I think if you're super committed to the idea and the space you're working on, in this case, education, um, if you're super committed and you're kind of the person who's not going to just jump around to different ideas, there's absolutely no reason that any business venture can be your life's work. And kind of having that mindset, being in it for the long term, I think is an important one.
You mentioned something very interesting there, and that's one thing that some entrepreneurs struggle with. It's what would we call it? Maximizing, I think is the word. Is it? I think Schwartz said something about that. But the fact that far away hills are greener, or they look at bright shiny things. So, you're building a company, and then you say, "Oh no, why don't I do this? Why don't I build another company?" So a lot of people become diffuse and distracted by
Yeah.
what they're doing, but that's not what you do.
No. So yeah, being focused, I think is important. I definitely, building a product market fit with, building a product that people love is a full-time job, at least until you get there. I don't know what there is, but until you get somewhere, until you've got something that people love, that is a full-time job. Let me kind of attest to that.
And what is you've already said you don't know what the answer is, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Success. How do you define that?
It's such a relative term. Sometimes I think this is so unsuccessful. But then other times, like times like this, when we look back, I think like, oh yeah, Off2Class is successful. I think it really depends, but working on something you love, having people using a product that you built, having people say nice things about a product you built, making a bit of a difference in student outcomes. Those are just some of the kind of basics, I would say.
And you've touched on also the satisfaction you get from,
Totally.
yeah.
Building something you love, working on something you love, working on something you created with your team, all of that.
And what would you recommend as regards books? What kind of books have you read? What could you recommend to our listeners who, are
I
starting
have
out, or
not.
maybe?
I'm brutal. I got nothing.
Oh, really?
I do not read business books, entrepreneur books, anything like that. I'm a big fan of evolutionary biology. So, any of the Jared Diamond books, I can go into kind of deep detail about those. Also a fan of Yuval Harari, and then a bunch of other lesser known ones. But yeah, I got nothing on entrepreneurial kind of authors. But if you want to talk evolutionary biology, I'm your guy.
Tell me about your journey of scaling the business. It started with you and your partner. Where did it go from there, and how did you
Yeah,
build?
so it was me, James Haywood, and Serdar Jevar when we were living in Istanbul, and then we started to bring on some kind of key first employees. One of them's name is Chris Rush, um, and then yeah, from there we're about 16 people right now. and growing and hiring. So there's a plug if anybody particularly is looking for a job, get in
Who
touch.
are you hiring for at the moment? You can
Mostly developers.
Mhm.
So if there's any kind of software developers out there that are really interested in kind of, coding the future of language learning, send me an email, Kris, Kris at off2class.com. There's the entrepreneur, always a salesman.
Yeah,
Um,
sure, you have to be. Always be closing, isn't
exactly.
it?
And yeah, I know what I would say, big lessons learned from us is that as you scale, it becomes all about hiring and managing your employees and building a team. And that was a huge lesson for us where, it was one thing to be kind of founder led and everybody in the tent is a founder. That's one thing. Then pivoting to being employee led is a whole other thing. And we just weren't we didn't know anything about that. But the good news is you can learn about that as you go.
And tell me about management. How did you find management of staff, and what would you say your management style is? Do you have a
Yeah, I'm pretty direct. But I would say no, motivating and managing employees was actually one of the hardest things. I didn't really have any experience in that. So yeah, no, I would say the style is pretty direct and honest, but also fair. And I guess it's kind of an old cliche, but you definitely want to hire people that are smarter than you. Or else you're just hiring yourself. And you definitely want diversity. You want different ideas coming in. You don't just want to hire a bunch of kind of replicas of the founders, because then you get into kind of tunnel vision and echo chamber type stuff. You really want to bring in people that are better than you and that are different than you.
So how do you know who to hire? Do you have an instinct for this, or do you have are there particular questions you ask, or I mean, how does it fit into your culture? What kind of people work for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, especially with COVID and hiring, you definitely want to find people that are self-starters, that are, kind of dependable, that are, not in any way concerned about metrics and measurement and performance, all that. And I think not just for startups, but for all sorts of businesses, that's become really important since March. So that I would say is core, like really people that get what it's like to work independently online from home, that type of thing. And then building an online culture, employee culture, has been another one of those pivots since March. We have daily team scrums just for 10 minutes. Everybody checks in online on Zoom, kind of announces what they're working on that day, and really focuses on if they need anything from anybody else. And then we have a weekly meeting, just company catch up, anything goes. And then once a week we have a workshop where one kind of division of the company will present something to the rest of the company, and kind of educate them on their side of the business, so that we don't become silos, and everybody kind of understands that the different kind of cogs and wheels that come together. And a lot of that stuff would happen organically if you had a physical office space, but online you really got to make an effort and be kind of proactive on some of that stuff.
And retaining staff.
Yeah, the irony is good people. The people you want to hire, the good people, are also in demand. So you can't take it too personally when a good person moves on to something better.
And generally, technology, English language teaching, COVID has obviously pushed things forward a lot. What's going to happen in the next 5 years? What do you foresee in technology in language teaching?
It's a great question. I think you're going to have kind of two tracks going on. On the one hand, teachers aren't going anywhere. So you're still going to have a kind of language learning teacher-led experience. But I think what a teacher-led experience means and looks like will be extremely different. I'm not exactly sure how, but it's going to be extremely different, and it's obviously going to be technology enabled. On the other side, you're definitely going to have a huge push towards, continue to have a huge push towards self-study, towards kind of direct student model with no teacher involved. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how those two tracks play out. Just from a pure motivational perspective, forget that the technology or the AI involved on recreating a language teacher. Just from a pure motivational perspective, there's very few people that can teach themselves a language, on Duolingo or something like that. Just from, the thousands of hours of motivation, you do need that human connection to keep you coming back for more. But, it'll be interesting to see how those two tracks play out and perhaps how they meet up.
And just a reminder to everybody, Kris's site is Off2Class. Now, 2 is the numeral 2, so off2class.com. And you can catch him at off2class.com /about us as well. So you can read all about the company. So tell me, where is the money in ELT?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would love to see and this is just an idea, I'm not sure if there's much money in it, but I would love to see the next generation of the student travel experience. So there's a long history of students from non-English speaking countries traveling to English speaking countries for kind of language immersion, language kind of travel tourism, maybe getting their feet wet and thinking about going to university in Canada, the US, UK, and there's a whole feeder system there. I would love to see the next generation of that experience, what that looks like. How does someone potentially through a software or a product get the travel experience without necessarily leaving home? And I think COVID has probably spawned that, but I would love to see what that looks like. If anybody's working on it, which I'm sure somebody is, maybe you can post it in the comments.
Yeah, definitely. We'd love to hear about your experiences with that. Tell me about customer issues. We touched a little bit on it earlier. Dealing with complaints, issues. What can you do?
Just have some thick skin. I remember hearing something by Brian Halligan. He's the HubSpot founder and CEO, and it was a podcast or perhaps a printed interview, and he was talking about. I think one of the questions from the interviewer was, do you plan on exiting HubSpot? Do you plan on selling HubSpot? And he said something to the effect of, I've been working on this for this many years, and finally it's working. Finally, the product actually works. And so this is the founder and CEO of HubSpot, probably about 2 years ago, at a time when millions of the companies in the planet are using HubSpot as their CRM, and he's saying, finally, it's actually working. So it's an iterative process. Not everything is going to work properly at the start. And you know what? One of the other things to keep in mind, besides that HubSpot tidbit, is how often massive products that have raised millions of dollars go down. and are offline. Like, we use Intercom, we use G Suite, we use, a lot of these really big, fat SaaS software kind of companies, and you'd be surprised how often their their sites go down. And it's like it always makes me feel really good. I'm like, oh wow, like Off2Class is great. Like compared, like we never go down.
Oh, really? Really? Yeah.
Well, no, I mean not compared to some of these guys. Yeah.
That's impressive because, my site, eflmagazine.com, it does go down from time to time. There are some issues come up, and it does happen, and it is stressful. But when you say that, and even YouTube went down a
There
few
you
months
go.
ago, didn't it? So yeah, it happens to everybody. But what you said about Halligan, the HubSpot founder, was really interesting. It reminds me of a story about Pablo Casals, the world famous cellist. I think he was in his 90s, and he was practicing, and he practiced for hours every day. And somebody said, "Mr. Casals, like, why are you practicing?" And he said, "I think I'm getting better." So it's kind of the same thing, isn't it? I mean, it's the iterative thing. It's the Kaizen, isn't the attitude in Japan? There's no real end goal as such. It's, working on the business is the pleasure itself, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me a little about your future plans for Off2Class. What's next? What can people expect? What's the inside track, if you can say, about?
Yeah, we released our kind of assessments module, so we're really going to build on kind of tracking students and delivering, that kind of data layer information back to teachers so that they can, save time doing working with their students, and so that we can continue kind of on our mission of saving time for teachers.
I remember a piece of advice I was given by a manager when I working for a company, and I was working in sales at the time, and it's always stuck with me. He said, "Don't presume they know what your company does or is about." And the company I worked for was quite famous and were quite well known. And the first question we would always ask clients was, "What do you know about our company?" So, for you, what do you think? What do people not know about your company? Is maybe a better way of putting it.
Well, I would assume that a lot of the folks listening don't know anything about us. So maybe I'll just start from the beginning about what we are. So yeah, we're a SaaS tool for English as a second language teachers. We combine kind of teacher-led lessons with homework, assessments, placement test, all into a kind of teacher-led SaaS tool. And what I would say is perhaps a lot of people might not really know, like, okay, that's great, it's just a tool for teachers, but kind of what guides us, and one of the main things that guides us is saving teachers time. So making their days more efficient, taking out the busy work, the faff work, and kind of liberating them so they can focus on what they do best, and that is focusing on their students.
That's a pain point, and that's something I've discovered with questions and questionnaires that I've done with teachers throughout the years. And one of the biggest pain points is marking and correction.
Totally.
Is that number one, would you say, for
Mark? And I would say even one more above that, lesson planning. So developing the content for a lesson, and I think that got really accelerated during COVID when a lot of bricks and mortar teachers had to quickly get online and, kind of left their worksheets and textbooks and what have you on their desks at their schools, and were, now teaching online and needed something that worked immediately overnight online. And, the content for a bricks and mortar classroom, is fundamentally quite different for what you need in a video conference classroom. And I think that's where Off2Class really comes in for a lot of teachers.
What mistakes have you made that you wouldn't like to see others make?
Be a bit careful on hiring at the beginning. You might not know a lot about hiring, but what you should know is just take your time and do your kind of checks and balances. And so yeah, be really, really prudent on your first hires, because those will define the kind of culture that you've got going forward. Yeah, I think, and potentially getting a bit quicker on sales and marketing, a bit faster, probably would have been good for us.
And for those who don't have a background in sales, and maybe a lot of our listeners will come from a teaching background, and they maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable doing sales. And I think my experience of meeting former teachers or entrepreneurs, they don't want to be too salesy, too pushy.
I agree. It's kind of funny, right? The whole world it's funny that people perceive, and this was something I learned a lot about. It's funny that people perceive sales as kind of sleazy, even though every single company, every single company, every single NGO, every single charity, even government, if you didn't have salespeople, you wouldn't have those organizations. And sales is actually really hard to do. It's hard to do well. It's hard to do it in a non-sleazy way. So I find it interesting. That's been a major kind of learning point, is how important sales is, and actually how intellectual it is. But when you're selling a product that you really believe in, that you've built, and that is valuable, it's not sleazy at all. Basically, what I tell new sales reps when they start with us is they spend most of their time learning the product at the start, and as long as they fall in love with the product, they're able to then go kind of represent it in a really kind of authentic and non-sleazy manner. It's we're not selling snake oil. I tell them, if you ever feel like you're kind of selling snake oil, then stop and send me a message and let's talk about that. No, your mission is, you've got an amazing product. A ton of people out there could benefit from it, and it is your job to get that benefit out to these people.
Excellent.
And, if you kind of stick with that, it's not sleazy, and it's you're just trying to identify people that you meet. If they've got a problem, potentially we have a solution, and just showing that kind of problem solution fit.
So, Kris, it's been fantastic talking to you. I learned a lot today, and I really hope our listeners will too. And I'm sure they can get in touch with you if they have any
Absolutely.
other questions. You're on Twitter, Facebook?
Absolutely.
What's the best way to? Yeah.
Twitter's a great one, at Off2Class. Facebook as well. We've got quite an awesome online community. So at the top of our Facebook page, facebook.com/Off2Class, there's a link to our Facebook group. It's great for teachers, but also for entrepreneurs. You can come over and learn from our community. And I can be reached at Kris, Kris, at Off2Class, OFF2class.com. And for any teachers or school owners out there that want to come check out what we're up to, you just go to Off2Class.com, and there's a big button that lets you set up a free account.
Great. And that reminds me, I think you sent an invite to join the group, which I will do. I've been kind of steering clear of Facebook and all these places over the past few months because of the news, not just COVID, but the country below you and the country to the east of Ireland. There's a lot of British and American news, which is kind of depressing. So stay away from social media as much as possible when not for work. That's my experience of the past few months.
Well, those are great. Those are great parting words for 2021, especially with the events of the last couple of weeks. So, no, thank you so much for having me, Philip, and thanks everybody for listening. And please get in touch. Would love to hear from everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, Kris.
Take care, Philip. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast with Philip Pound. For more great advice and resources, check out eflmagazine.com. If you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.